Welcome to Common Point, a program for and about communication. I'm your host, Dan Thomas, and our program comes to you today from the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum in Windsor, Connecticut. We're at 115 Pearson Lane, an all-volunteer group, and we're going to show you some of our wonderful, wonderful collection.
Use Ajax, the foaming cleanser.
Alka-Seltzer, plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is.
Double your pleasure, double your fun with double mint gum.
J-E-L-L. Oh, the big red letters stand for the Jello family.
I was born in Boston and went to the schools and universities there, including one that was founded by the co-founder of Hartford, Joseph Hooker. John Eliot was his name. And so his history had a great influence on me. And after graduation in the social sciences, I went over to Europe to work with the Wine and Volunteers. And that was a summer event. And then I bicycled throughout Europe and returned to this country. I still have a piece of that bicycle. My first job was down at Sikorsky Aircraft due to the fact that I had been bequeathed a camera by my namesake, Dr. Edward East, and I could take pictures which Sikorsky needed for their metallurgical lab. And from there I went to various other parts of the company and learned a lot about aircraft drawing and design. And then in 1955 I left and came back up to Boston to MIT to take a graduate work there. And it's there that I met my future wife, Margaret. And we, after we were married at the Harvard Chapel, we settled down. I was in a manufacturer's representative in instrumentation, which I enjoyed very much. And I continued very much in that line, with the exception of an enterprise involving the field of numerical control, which has to do with tape-programmed machine tools. I was a charter member of the Numerical Control Society. And eventually that brought me down to Connecticut, where one of the major manufacturers of numerical controls had their business located in Bristol, Connecticut. We settled in West Hartford because of the school system and friends there, and pretty much spent our years there. I very much in the same field of technology, formed the Connecticut River branch of the Numerical Control Society. And when I retired from Superior Electric, I started work on our house and managed to fall off a scaffold, which didn't do very good things to my head, and but it left the thoughts intact. I saw a fire in the distance, and it turned out to be the Royal Typewriter Company burning down. There were 2 wings left, and I proposed that that these wings be turned into a museum of communication technology. Unfortunately, Stop and Shop beat me to it, leveled the remaining building and put their parking lot there. And then I heard of the radio museum starting up in East Hartford, which greatly intrigued me. I went over there, met with John Ellsworth, and very promptly joined this wonderful group. And I've been with it ever since, as we've moved from different locations, both in East Hartford and here. And that pretty much brings me up to the present.
With the experiences you've had, Ed, what is your favorite area at the museum? Do you have a favorite era or a group of exhibits?
I'll put it this way. I've got a favorite in every group.
Ed, we're in the display of our Victrolas and Edison phonographs. Can you tell us a little bit about these wonderful machines?
Well, the recording of sound was the next step in recording information. Initially, it had been the telegraph and the photograph. These machines had the ability to pick up sound and play them back. And that was a technology started out by Edison, basically a miniaturization of the lathe. And instead of using a cutting tool, using a sound scribing tool. In the case of Edison, that sound scriber went in and out of the surface, as opposed to our present records, where the needle goes back and forth, and for that reason is able to operate in stereo sound as well as mono. So it's been an amazing development, which is still strong today. I'll play one of these very early discs. It sounds a little tinny by today's standards, but it was a miracle back then to be able to do this. The only problem was that to record multiple cylinders to mass produce them, you still had to work from the sound to each recording. They were done one at a time. There was no way to press them without getting a parting line in the edge of the cylinder, which would have been unacceptable. This machine, by the way, cost $50, which you can multiply by at least 10 to get an idea of its present price. It boasted a diamond needle, which would have eliminated the need to change the needle frequently. However, the production of the flat record was a lot easier, and this machine here shows a wonderful example of a pickup head that could move back and forth. And we'll start her up, get a little music here. This, unfortunately I didn't let it get up to speed here, but now you can. And you open up the doors of the cabinet, and you can get full sound out of it.
That's quite loud.
It has a tremendous sonic capability. If you had it in your house, you wouldn't want it to be any louder. And you can change the tone control, muffle the highs by putting the top down, or make it a little more silent this way.
Now, this machine that you're just demonstrating, this is a Victrola. The first one was an Edison.
Yes, that's right. Yes. He initiated the principle. Now, later on, when his cylinders became non-competitive, they were too expensive to make the way he was making them. He also went to the flat record. This record is a little thicker than the ones that we are used to, primarily because the needle went in and out of the surface just like they did in his cylinder records. So he was able to preserve many of his patents, including the whole mechanism operating as one unit, the horn and the pickup all operating together. The sound is a little more muted, distinctly different than the other one. This even has a volume control.
That basically mutes like a trumpet. There's a big piece that goes in and out of the center.
Yeah, something like a boxing glove. That's right. Yeah.
Now, this proceeded for how many years since Edison began the phonograph to these phonographs here?
I can't really say because there wasn't a distinct cessation of one and start of the other. But I would say by the end of World War I, the flat record was pretty well established.
Now, when did the first electronic or amplified sound come along?
Well, that required the development of the vacuum tube, and it was Western Electric who had the most to gain from that. It was a Yale graduate who came up with the idea, and Western Electric perfected it and used it to extend their telephone conversations all the way across the country, which had been quite impossible up till that time. You were lucky if you could get a good telephone conversation between one city and another. And in fact, one of the most disparaging of the telephone owners was Mark Twain. He had some very choice words about where the inventor of the telephone might end up.
We're going to move now to the next field, and that is motion pictures. From talking records, basically, the original recordings, what was the next logical step, Ed?
Well, recording pictures was one. Actually, it had been done for a while, and that was via the daguerreotype. But by the time we'd gotten to the Civil War, an English process, the daguerreotype was a French process. The English process involved a positive-negative film, and that was a lot more sensitive and easy to carry around. So that dominated the photography ever since then, with the emulsion being either on glass plate, if you were a professional, didn't mind carrying around hundreds of pounds of glass plates, or film, which Eastman Kodak popularized. And in the process, there was a standardized film, 35 millimeter, that was initially used in an environment called a nickelodeon. You'd put your nickel into a machine, the light would turn on, and you would turn the crank to see the action. And in fact, over here we have a picture of a nickelodeon that's on a 1910 Edison projector. Obviously, the projector made it possible for a much larger number of people to view the episode and quickly replaced the Nickelodeon. But it was a technology that in one form or another we've all enjoyed since.
Can you tell us a little bit about this projector? Now, is this a silent movie projector?
Yes, it is. It's a 1910 Edison silent projector. Now, the projection process, or I should say the listener's experience, was not necessarily silent. There was very often a piano player. If it were a travelogue, there would be an elocutionist. The audience might react with noises, stamping their feet on the floor. So it could be a lively event, even without the recording of sound.
I noticed looking at this projector, it's just a beautiful example here at the museum, there's a fire extinguisher on the floor.
Well, that's because the film at that time was made of cellulose nitrate, which is almost explosively combustible. So you were very prudent to have the fire extinguisher there.
Now, how did they make the light, the bright light bright enough to project this on a big screen?
Well, at that time, the incandescent lamps did not have that capability, so they used carbon arcs. And actually, a carbon arc lamp was quite old technology. It had been demonstrated at the Royal Society in the early 1800s, so its use goes way back as a source of light.
But a very hot source of light.
Yes, not only a hot source of light, but the carbons wear down, and you have to continuously change them. When used for street lighting, that was a big event.
What was the next step? We have silent films. I would presume we're going to talk about talkies?
Yes, we do have a machine here that was one of the initial talking machines, and it had at least two modes of operation, and we'll go over and take a look at that.
All right, Ed, let's walk this way over here. And so this is the talking machine. I want to change positions here just a minute. Now, what era would this machine be?
Well, this was at a time when everything was in flux. We had the old technology, often involved playing the record separately. In this machine, we have a record which will play for 15 minutes that is geared to the same motor that drives the film. So the synchronization, once you've started at the same point, the synchronization will hold all the way through.
That was some synchronization for the time. And this had a similar light source, I can tell, with the chimney.
Yes, that's right, carbon arc. And it also
I'm going to open this here.
Yeah, there you go. As you can see, the adjustment of a carbon arc, especially if it has a mirror to help concentrate its light, is a pretty tricky thing, as you can tell by the levers at the back there. But a good operator eventually learned how to do it well.
Now, what about, that's not the technology certainly we use today, using it on records.
No, our technology evolved into sound strip on film, which this machine also has the capability of. This is a rare machine representing the time of transition to the sound strip on the film.
Yeah, this, I don't think we can probably see this, but there is a strip on one side, which would be on this side where my finger is, that has an optical track, I believe as they called it.
That's right.
And they still use something similar today, I think, don't they?
Well, it depends upon what media you have. If it's all digital media, then you use various forms of digital storage that we have today.
But it's now, what era was this? What year? Do we have any idea what year this projector was from?
Well, it would be definitely post World War I, and I can't definitely say when. I would say sometime in the 20s, when we started to see the movie industry particularly active, and all of the stars that you see up here represented. It was a very exciting time. It would have stayed in New York, but it migrated to California for a number of reasons that I won't go into right now.
All right, thank you, Ed Sax. We'll be moving on to another exhibit. Along with motion pictures, Ed, there was a move with the electronics of the time to start doing new and different things. And one of these is this incredible audio amplifier that we have here. Can you tell us about this?
Well, it is a good size, although by today's standards it's way bigger than it might be because it involved vacuum tubes. In fact, early vacuum tubes, the development of vacuum tube was as a result of the telephone industry needing what the telegraph had. The telegraph had a relay that was able to continue transmission all the way across the country. But the telephone was lucky to be able to communicate from one city to the next, especially with its grounded wire lines and that kind of a thing. Mark Twain had some very savory remarks on the telephone in his house. At any rate, the development of the vacuum tube and its refinement by Western Electric led to the telephone extending all the way across the country and indeed across the Atlantic. And by the time the First World War started, Eiffel Tower had received a transatlantic telephone call.
So this amplifier was used for what?
Well, in this particular case, it was used for amplifying the sound from a motion picture projector, but it could have been used for anything else. But since the licensing was by Western Electric, the Western Electric name is on it.
And Western Electric is a huge name, even in the early days of broadcasting. And I actually used Western Electric equipment in my early days in radio. Not that I go back that far, but it was still active in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, it was a pioneer.
Ed, we've been talking about technology from Western Electric that involved a telegraph and telephone, but what about wireless?
Well, wireless made it possible to eliminate all those miles and miles of telephone posts and wires. And it was started in theory by a number of people, and in practice, the first person was Nikola Tesla to demonstrate remote control of small boats, but the Navy took no interest, and the technology passed on to a young gentleman in Italy by the name of Marconi, whose parents were quite wealthy. And when he succeeded in making the first wireless, which was wireless telegraphy, the Italian government took no interest. His mother said, "Go over to England, where my family makes an excellent whiskey and has plenty of contacts." So he did that and found himself telegraphing the Royal Yacht Races to the results to the London Times. And then he went across to Newfoundland and demonstrated he could receive signals, and that really generated the attention of people who were at sea, because it meant that ships could now call for ships in distress could now call for help. And so it was really the Navy or the navies of the world that developed this technology.
And this really was the start of radio.
Exactly, it was the serious start of radio, yes, where a lot of money was poured into the development.
Now, what do we have in our display?
Well, our display here starts out with a simple spark coil, pretty much a demonstrator. And if you had a small radio somewhere down the... There you go. you would hear that the hissing of that spark. This is an example of other ways to generate the spark, including a rotary spark generator, and some of these were very serious technologies used for getting the best long distance transmission. The waves at that time were transmitted at they were long waves, not short waves. But long waves had the ability to go across the Atlantic.
Well, Ed, this has been fascinating, and we are going to continue our tour on our next program, our next presentation of the Common Point series. We certainly appreciate you being with us today, and very much looking forward to the next adventure we have here at the museum and more of this wonderful equipment that we have to see.
My pleasure.
Ed Sax from the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum. I'd like to thank my cameraman, Dan Crowley, who has graciously volunteered his time to come in and shoot these programs on scene. And we will return next time with more from the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum. For Common Point, I'm your host, Dan Thomas. Thank you for watching. Pepsi-Cola, it's the spot, 12 ounces, that's a lot, twice as much to do. Pepsi-Cola is the drink for you. Nickel, 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 nickel. Pepsi-Cola hits the spot, 12 full ounces, that's a lot, twice as much for a nickel too. Pepsi-Cola is the drink for you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.